When the Constitution of India was in the process of its making in the Constituent Assembly of India, the forefathers or the fathers of the founders of the Constitution of India, they borrowed some important features from the other important constitutions of the world to strengthen the very constitution of India. So they incorporated those provisions from the constitution of other countries into the newly enacted constitution of India. So from the very important incorporation to the constitution of India from other constitutions of the world, the first one is the parliamentary and unitary form of government, or the cabinet system of government, or council of ministers, and the very importance of lower house and a bicameral legislature, as in India, the House of People and the Council of State, respectively, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and the very element of unitary spirit, these were borrowed from the United Kingdom. The working of United Kingdom inspired the United Kingdom is not having a written constitution, but they are working which enable our founders of the constitution to borrow the very idea of parliamentary form of government, or the very supremacy of parliament, and the other unitary features to the newly enacted Constitution of India. Besides that, they also incorporated the directive principles of state policy in Part 4th of the Constitution, and that directive principle of state policy is borrowed from the Irish Constitution of Ireland, and those directive principles of state policies are the directions given to state to enact such legislations relating to socio-economic and liberal principles for development of the Indian society, and the very residuary power which is under Article 148 of the Constitution. This very idea of residuary power, which is bestowed to the Union under the present Constitution, was borrowed from the Canadian Constitution, and the very idea of quasi-federal feature or the quasi-federal items that we found in the Constitution of India. This quasi-federal idea was borrowed from the Canadian and Australian Constitution. And as regarding the very emergency provisions, as it is provided under Article 352, 356 and 360 relating to national emergency and the President's rule over a state and the financial emergency, these provisions are borrowed from the Weimar Constitution of Germany. And as reading amending powers, it borrowed from the Constitution of United States of America, so also from Canadian Constitution, also from Australian Constitution. That's why our amending provisions make our Constitution in comparison to United States of America as flexible rather than more rigid. And the next one, that is regarding distribution of power. So the very distribution of power as in between the union and states in India, such as union list, state list, and concurrent list, these were borrowed from Government of India Act 1935, which first time provided such a distribution of powers in between the center and the provinces. The then, as regarding federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list. So, very distribution of power between the union and the state. The idea was borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. And lastly, the very socialistic principles. And these socialistic principles, as developed in India from the Awadh session of Indian National Congress, and which was finalized in the Awadh session of Indian National Congress in 1955, and which were finally ratified in the Bhubaneswar Indian National Congress in 1962. And these socialistic principles were borrowed from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic Constitution. And lastly, the fundamental duties, which are now an integral part of the Constitution of India. These are added and inserted into the Constitution of India as Part 4A under the 42nd Constitutional Amendment of 1976, and these are the important salient features as we found in the Constitution of India, and the very incorporation of those provisions from the other constitutions of the world, such as the Irish Constitution, from which we borrowed the very directive principles of state policy and the residuary power under Article 148 from the Canadian Constitution, and the quasi-federal ideas from the Canadian and Australian Constitution, and the very emergency provisions from the Weimar Constitution of Germany, and the amending provisions from the USA Constitution, Canadian Constitution, and Australian Constitution. And as regarding very distribution of powers among between the Union and the state, it was borrowed from the Government of India Act 1935. So also regarding socialistic principles and fundamental duties from Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. And so in this way, as regarding an introductory idea regarding the very Constitution of India, and as per the Constituent Assembly of India, we have finished both the historical background under which the very constitutional administration of Indian Union and states originated in 1858, and how it resulted in enactment of the Indian Independence Act 1947, and then the constitution of the Constituent Assembly and its inauguration and the first meeting in 9 December 1946 under the presidency of Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, under on whose demise on 26 November 1949, when it was adopted under the permanent president of the Constituent Assembly, and it was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and finally the Constitution of India came into effect on 26 January 1950.